General Hospital spoilers for the next 2 weeks, January 12th to January 23rd, reveal that Willow felt the weight of the courtroom lift off her shoulders the moment the verdict of not guilty echoed through the chamber. Yet the relief lasted only a heartbeat before dissolving into a familiar, suffocating dread. Freedom, at least a kind handed down by a jury, did nothing to erase the truth she carried like a bruise beneath her skin. Because even if the law released her, Drew's memory still held the power to destroy her life in an instant. She knew that somewhere deep inside him existed the moment she wished she could erase forever. The moment her finger tightened around a trigger in panic and sent a bullet into him. She told herself it was fear, self-defense, confusion, anything but malice. Yet the justification never softened the image carved into her conscience. Now, with the trial behind her, Willow found herself trapped in a new kind of prison. One built not of walls but of possibilities. Because every hour that passed carried the risk that Drew's fragmented recollections would snap together, forming the truth she had fought so desperately to bury. She could already sense a shift inside him. A subtle but undeniable change that signaled something within Drew was adjusting, realigning, reaching for clarity. His eyes lingered too long on her face, as though searching for something he couldn't name. His questions grew sharper, his silences heavier, and his intuition, always one of his most dangerous qualities, seemed to be awakening again. Willow felt the shift like cold water running down her spine, because it meant the safety she clung to was rapidly slipping. Drew began mentioning flashes, sounds, sensations, brief impressions of the night he was shot. A metallic clang, a scream, the sharp recoil of fear. He spoke about them casually as though analyzing dreams. But to Willow each word was a warning bell. His mind was piecing itself back together. And if those pieces locked into place, no verdict would matter. No plea for understanding would save her. She would become, in his eyes, the person who had betrayed him in the most unforgivable way. Willow tried to steady her nerves, tried to convince herself that Drew's memory loss was too deep, too fractured, that even if he remembered something, he might never reach the final, devastating truth. Yet the logic faltered each time Drew drifted into a moment of stillness, looking at her like a man chasing a shadow he almost recognized. She began to withdraw slightly, subtly hoping her distance might dull his suspicion. But it only made Drew more observant. He asked if she was scared, asked if something was wrong, asked why she seemed unable to breathe whenever he approached. She avoided the answers because the only truth she could offer was the one that would condemn her. The pressure tightening around Willow became a new form of adjustment in her life, one far more punishing than the legal battle she had just endured. It was the kind of pressure that filled her lungs with a heavy ache and made sleep feel impossible. Because even in her dreams she saw Drew standing in the doorway, memory restored, judgment in his eyes. She feared not the punishment but the look of betrayal he would give her. The moment his kindness would harden into something cold and unrecognizable. She feared losing the version of Drew who still believed she was worth trusting. And more than anything, she feared what Drew would do once the truth surfaced. Because a man who had lost so much already might react in ways she could not predict. There were whispers around town about Drew making new decisions, about him seeking answers, making adjustments in his own life, perhaps even preparing a revelation of his own. Willow didn't know whether he was conscious of the shift happening inside him, or whether instinct alone guided him. But she knew the path he was walking would eventually lead straight to her. Each day that passed tightened the invisible noose around her heart, proving that her freedom was nothing more than a fragile illusion waiting to shatter. She lived every moment with the awareness that Drew might awaken tomorrow with full clarity, and that awakening would be the blow that collapsed everything she had built. In those quiet, unguarded moments, Willow finally understood the cruel irony of her situation. The court had declared her innocent, yet she had never felt more guilty, more exposed, or more trapped. And though no one else could see it, she knew the real verdict had not yet been delivered. Because it would not come from a judge or a jury, it would come from Drew. The moment his memory returned, and the truth she feared would finally rise to the surface. Sunny could feel it in the air before anyone spoke it aloud. The subtle but unmistakable shift that signaled Sidwell was no longer the unstoppable force he pretended to be. For months, Sidwell had been the shadow every citizen of Port Charles felt but could not see. The name whispered behind threats, arrests, and accusations. The architect of the fear that had wrapped itself around Sunny and Laura ever since Dalton's death became the weapon used to hunt them. Yet now, for the first time, Sunny sensed that the monster towering over them had finally shown a weakness. And this realization triggered a profound adjustment inside him, a recalibration of instinct and purpose that transformed his mindset from defensive endurance to strategic retaliation. Laura noticed it too, watching the change settle in Sunny like a storm preparing to break. It wasn't rage and it wasn't desperation, it was clarity. A razor-sharp awareness that Sidwell's tightening paranoia had opened a crack large enough for them to strike. They had lived too long under the suffocating pressure of being framed for Dalton's murder, a crime that had never belonged to them, and the psychological torture of being hunted for something they didn't do had left its mark as a deep, lingering obsession neither could fully name. The accusation had become a ghost that followed them into every room, every conversation, every silent moment where their minds drifted back to the night everything changed. But now, as they pieced together Sidwell's missteps, that ghost began losing form, dissolving into the realization that they were not prey anymore. They were becoming the threat Sidwell never expected. Sunny studied every tremor in Sidwell's behavior, noting how the man delegated too quickly, reacted too sharply, and tried too hard to maintain the illusion of control. Control had always been Sidwell's addiction, the thing he wielded like a weapon, and losing even a fraction of it turned him into something unstable. Sunny recognized that instability for what it was, fear disguised as fury. He had seen it before in enemies who believed themselves invincible until the moment they understood. Someone had found the seam in their armor. Sidwell's seam was growing, splitting further each time he made a reckless choice. Each time he overplayed his hand. Each time he let his obsession with Dalton's death push him into a corner he could no longer hide in. And Sunny, sensing the moment had come, began creating a new plan layered with adjustments he had been waiting months to activate. These adjustments were not small. They were fundamental changes in how he and Laura would navigate the battlefield ahead. No longer would they simply react to Sidwell's moves, they would anticipate them, redirect them, and turn every tactic back on him until he drowned in his own strategy. Sunny started connecting pieces that had once seemed unrelated, gathering threads of information scattered across Port Charles and weaving them into a net that would eventually tighten around Sidwell until escape became impossible. Laura, once nearly crushed under the weight of the accusation, now felt a shift of her own. She had spent sleepless nights reviewing every document, every timeline, every detail Sidwell used to frame her and Sunny, questioning whether justice still existed or whether truth had become something that could be purchased by the highest bidder. The torment of being doubted aided her identity as a leader, a mother, and a woman sworn to uphold the law, and she carried guilt that was never hers to carry, simply because Sidwell was skilled at making innocence look like deceit. Now, as she stood beside Sunny, she finally felt the distant rumblings of deliverance, the sense that her name, their names, might soon be freed from the stain Sidwell had painted over them. The obsession that Dalton's death had become would no longer consume their days. If they managed to seize this moment before Sidwell regained control, and Sunny would not let that opportunity slip away. He watched as new adjustments formed around Sidwell's empire, loyal allies turning distant, hired enforcers hesitating, corrupted officials questioning the stability of the man they once feared. Even the underworld whispered that Sidwell had lost his edge, that the powerful hunter was becoming the hunted. This was the weakness Sunny planned to exploit. But Sunny's goal wasn't simply revenge, it was purification. Sidwell had infected every corner of Port Charles with lies, intimidation, and manipulation. The entire city had lived in fear of crossing him, and Sunny wanted to rip that fear out by the root so completely that Sidwell's name would become nothing more than a cautionary tale told in hushed tones, long after he was gone. Laura shared this vision, though hers came from a deeper emotional place, the desire to reclaim her sense of peace, to breathe without feeling the phantom weight of Dalton's death pressing against her chest. She had carried the accusation with a quiet dignity, but inside she felt the constant threat of collapse, knowing that one wrong move could destroy everything she stood for. Now, as Sunny revealed each new phase of their counterattack, Laura's pulse steadied with determination instead of dread. Each step they took, gathering evidence, seeking out Sidwell's blind spots, aligning with those he had underestimated, brought them closer to the truth that had been denied them for too long. Dalton's murder had been twisted into a weapon, but when the truth finally emerged, it would be the blade that cut Sidwell down. Sunny imagined the moment Sidwell realized he had lost not only control but the narrative itself. The moment his grip on the city shattered and he saw Sunny and Laura standing over the ruins of his empire. The moment he would understand that his obsession with Dalton's death was the very thing that led to his downfall. And when that moment came, Sunny knew the shadows that had haunted them would finally lift, revealing a freedom neither he nor Laura had dared to believe in. The adjustments now shaping their path were not merely strategies, but transformations, shifts in power and truth, in identity, all converging toward the inevitable collapse of a man who believed himself untouchable. And as they moved forward, Sunny and Laura both sensed the same truth rising with unstoppable momentum. Sidwell's era of terror was ending, and with its end came their long-awaited chance to step into the light again, unbound by fear, unmarked by lies and free from the ghost of a crime they never committed. Britt felt the tension long before she could name it. A cold prickle along her spine that warned her something dangerous was moving closer with every passing hour, and no matter how carefully she tried to carry on with her life, the threat refused to loosen its grip. It hovered over her like an invisible hand pressed against the back of her neck, reminding her that she was being watched, monitored, evaluated by forces she never fully understood. The question consuming her now wasn't if danger was coming but from where. Because Brennan's shadow had already stretched far too close, and Marco, assigned by Sidwell to keep her under surveillance, had begun to move with a sharper, more unsettling precision. Each step Britt took felt mirrored by another pair of footsteps just beyond her sight, and she could not determine whether the real threat was the man who openly despised her, or the one who worked silently in the dark, carrying out Sidwell's commands with an obedience that bordered on fanaticism. The world around her seemed to tighten, inch by inch, as if Sidwell's network were adjusting itself, recalibrating its chains of control, and Britt sensed she might become collateral damage in a system designed to crush anyone who drifted out of line. Yet, despite the mounting pressure closing in on her, there was one place where Britt felt her heart breathe again, and that was when Jason stepped into view. Something shifted in her when he was near, something softer than the sharp-edged fear that had been ruling her days. Jason didn't speak much, didn't promise safety, didn't claim to understand everything happening around her, but the truth was he didn't need to. His presence alone cut through the suffocating fog in her mind. When he offered to take her out, even if just for a brief moment of normalcy, Britt felt the world tilt in a different direction, opening a small, warm space where she could remember what it felt like not to be hunted. The date itself wasn't dramatic or elaborate, but the gentle silence between them became its own kind of refuge, a reminder that not every corner of her life had collapsed into fear. Still, even during that fragile peace, Britt couldn't shake the feeling that the danger trailing her had followed them, lingering in the background like a predator nursing its patience. She knew Brennan had reasons to target her, and that Marco operated under orders she wasn't supposed to understand. Sidwell's control depended on silence, obedience, and fear, and Britt, simply by existing outside his grasp, had become a loose thread he could not tolerate. Jason sensed her unease, even if she refused to acknowledge it aloud, and that awareness pushed him into a new adjustment of his own. His instincts, long shaped by violence, loyalty, and survival, began sharpening around her. He didn't need explicit warnings to recognize a tightening perimeter. He could feel it the same way he felt the air shift before a storm. The decision to protect Britt wasn't something he planned. It was something that happened naturally, an internal recalibration he didn't question, because questioning it would have meant denying the pull he felt toward her. And yet, Jason was not blind to his own complications. Even as he grew closer to Britt, a part of his life remained entangled in questions he had not yet answered. His upcoming meeting with Elizabeth loomed over him like unfinished business. He didn't know whether the conversation would revolve around Willow's trial, about Drew, or about something deeper, something connected to the past he shared with Elizabeth, a past that still had the power to reroute his emotional compass if he wasn't careful. Britt felt this tension even without him saying a word. She understood the invisible divide Jason carried between past and present, between loyalty and desire, between what he felt obligated to protect and what he was only beginning to reach for. That meeting with Elizabeth represented a kind of control Jason had not yet regained, a reminder that he, too, was navigating his own series of adjustments. These new shifts in Britt's life, Jason's life, and the dangerous world tightening around them, formed the foundation of a larger transformation neither of them had intended, but which now felt inevitable. Britt found herself depending on Jason not for rescue but for grounding, for clarity, for something real amid the manufactured terror Sidwell's organization had wrapped around her. Jason, in turn, found himself stepping toward Britt with a level of intention he hadn't felt in years, driven not by impulse but by quiet certainty. Their connection wasn't built on romantic fantasy but on survival, trust, and the strange comfort of knowing that amid the chaos swallowing Port Charles, they had somehow become each other's safe place. And as the forces trailing Britt continued tightening their hold, as Brennan plotted and Marco observed and Sidwell adjusted his strategies to regain control, the bond between Jason and Britt only deepened, not despite the threat but because of it. The more the world tried to fracture them, the more their connection grew, an unexpected development that neither Sidwell nor any of his enforcers had anticipated. That was the true danger now. Not Brennan, not Marco, not even the threats whispering behind closed doors, but the undeniable fact that Jason and Britt were beginning to form something powerful, enough to alter the entire balance of control. This was the adjustment Sidwell never prepared for, the one that changed everything. Ava moved through the corridors of Spoon Island with the silent certainty of someone who had survived too many storms to ignore the instinct crawling beneath her skin. an instinct that told her something was out of place, something breathing in the shadows, something watching her every move with an intensity she couldn't yet name. Spoon Island had always carried its own brand of darkness, but this time the darkness felt alive, charged with purpose. The walls seemed to whisper warnings as she passed, reminding her of the island's long history of secrets, betrayals, and buried things that refused to stay buried. Yet even with all her experience navigating chaos, Ava wasn't prepared for the moment she stepped into the abandoned West Wing, and found Valentin standing there as though materializing from the shadows themselves. His expression was a blend of exhaustion, desperation, and sharp calculation, an expression that told her he had not come here willingly, nor was he hiding without reason. Ava froze, heart pounding, because if Valentin was on Spoon Island in this state, then the danger stalking him was far worse than anything she had imagined. Valentin was not a man easily cornered, and yet here he was, pushed into the island's forgotten corners like a fugitive hiding from a monster he could no longer outrun. And as Ava stared into his cold, determined eyes, she sensed the truth before he even had the chance to speak it. Sidwell was closing in, and Valentin was running out of places to hide. The discovery jolted Ava, but the real shock came moments later when she realized she had inadvertently triggered something far larger than her own fear. Sidwell had embedded his surveillance systems deep into the infrastructure of Windermere hidden sensors, silent triggers, motion algorithms calibrated to detect anything out of place. And the moment Ava entered the wrong corridor at the wrong time, the system whispered a notification directly into Sidwell's field of awareness. There was an intruder, a presence he wanted more than anything. Valentin. Ava didn't know that Sidwell was watching, didn't know that her discovery had alerted him, but she felt the shift in the atmosphere like a hand closing around her throat. Instead of reacting with the fury she expected, Sidwell responded with an eerie, suffocating calm. His reaction wasn't the explosive rage of a man losing control. It was the careful restructuring of someone who believed he had just gained the advantage he needed. Sidwell issued orders with surgical precision, his voice cold, steady, betraying none of the anger he must have felt when he realized Valentin had returned to the one place Sidwell least wanted him to be. To Sidwell, Spoon Island represented a threat, a wild card, a place tied to secrets he desperately needed to keep buried. And the idea that Valentin had slithered back into its depths struck something primal inside him. Yet his response remained controlled, methodical. He adjusted. He recalibrated. He shifted his priorities as though Ava's presence near Valentin was the last piece in a puzzle he had been trying to complete for months. Ava could not hear Sidwell's commands, could not see the tightening trap closing around her, but she felt it in the way the shadows lengthened at her feet, in the way the silence thickened around her, in the way Valentin's body tensed as though sensing danger gathering around them like a storm. Valentin knew Sidwell too well, understood the way the man thought, the way he processed betrayal, the way he hunted those who defied him. If Sidwell had detected his return, then the island was no longer a temporary refuge, it was a snare tightening by the second. Yet even in his desperation, Valentin's gaze cut through the fog of fear to focus on something deeper, something more urgent than his own survival. There was someone below them, someone Sidwell believed he had broken, someone waking up from the prison Sidwell had wrapped around her mind. Anna had spent weeks in the underground chamber beneath Spoon Island, studying every crack in the structure, every weakness in her guards, every inconsistency in Sidwell's operational rhythm. Sidwell believed she was contained, broken, contained within a psychological labyrinth she could not escape. But Anna was anything but defeated. She had survived far worse than Sidwell's cruelty, and instead of allowing his tactics to crush her spirit, she dissected them with the precision of a woman trained to navigate impossible captivity. Anna waited, observed, calculated. And now, as the vibrations of Ava's steps echoed through the stone walls, as the island shifted under the weight of Sidwell's tightening paranoia, Anna sensed an opening forming in the chaos. Sidwell's attention was divided between Valentin, between Ava, between the growing sense that his grip on control was slipping. This division was the adjustment Anna had been waiting for. The shift in his focus, the crack in his routine, the change in the guards pacing it all signaled that Sidwell was vulnerable in a way he had not been since the beginning of his reign of terror. And Anna intended to exploit that vulnerability with everything she had left. As she edged closer to freedom, her mind sharpened with the realization that she was not merely escaping. She was breaking a psychological chain Sidwell believed unbreakable. Meanwhile, Ava struggled to process the enormity of the situation unraveling around her. Valentin's presence meant danger, yes, but it also meant truths she had not yet uncovered, truths about Sidwell's plans, about the secrets buried beneath Spoon Island, about the reason the estate seemed to pulse with fear every time someone spoke Dalton's name. Ava had been dragged into the epicenter of something far larger than herself, And as much as she hated being manipulated, she understood she could not walk away, not yet. Valentine, breath shallow, eye sharp, warned her without words as Sidwell was already closing in. And while Ava tried to steady her racing pulse, another realization froze her in place. Sidwell wasn't angry that she had found Valentine. He was pleased. Because he was using her actions to locate Valentine, using her reactions to gauge his enemy's movements, using her presence to force Valentine into the open. Sidwell's control was expanding like a constricting coil around them, and Ava, for the first time, understood just how thoroughly he had planned every step of this twisted game. Yet, ironically, Sidwell's confidence was also becoming his undoing. Because while he believed he held every string, Ava had become unpredictable. Valentine had become desperate, and Anna, his most dangerous captive, was preparing to rise from the shadows he had buried her in. The storm building beneath Spoon Island was unstoppable now. Ava's discovery, Valentine's return, Sidwell's chilling reaction, Anna's calculated escape. Each event fed into the next, forming a chain of consequences Sidwell could not contain no matter how tightly he clung to control. And when all these forces collided, when Anna emerged into the light, when Valentine chose whether to flee or fight, when Ava realized she had become both pawn and catalyst, Sidwell would find himself staring into a reckoning he had never prepared for. A reckoning that would expose the weakness he spent so long denying. A reckoning that would finally shatter the illusion of power he had built. And Spoon Island, with all its ghosts and secrets, would bear witness to the collapse of the man who had believed he could control everything, only to learn that the biggest shock of all was the one he never saw coming.